They didn't say I couldn't afford the house. Not in those words. They didn't have to. It was in the way the realtor's eyes flicked to my 10-year-old car before she even introduced herself. In the slight recalibration of her smile when I told her I wanted to see properties in Meadowbrook Estates. In the careful, almost rehearsed tone she used when she asked whether I'd been pre-approved for homes in this price range. We were standing in the driveway of a $700,000 listing I hadn't even stepped inside yet, and she was already vetting me like a risk assessment. I told her yes. I had a pre-approval letter. She didn't nod and move on. She asked to see it. Immediately. Right there on the concrete, before unlocking the front door. I handed it over without comment. $450,000. Conventional loan. Clean credit. She read it slowly. And I watched the shift, professional politeness tightening into quiet judgment. She informed me that homes in Meadowbrook typically sold for $700,000 and up. That perhaps we should focus on something more suitable. Starter homes. Condos. Neighborhoods that better aligned with my position. I asked what that meant. She didn't clarify. She just suggested we reschedule and explore options that were more realistic. Realistic. I didn't argue. Didn't explain liquidity, portfolio diversification, or why that pre-approval number was strategic, not limiting. I simply said I'd like to see the house. She hesitated. Then told me she had another appointment and would send listings elsewhere. She left. I stayed. And standing in that driveway, staring at the house she wouldn't show me, I understood something that has nothing to do with real estate and everything to do with perception. People don't evaluate what you have, they evaluate what they think you deserve. And once they've decided you don't belong, they'll redirect you before you ever reach the front door. That was the moment I decided I wouldn't just buy the house. I would buy it on my terms. And I would do it twice. I sat in my car for 20 minutes after she left. Not angry. Just calculating. The pre-approval letter I'd shown her was real. $450,000 approved through a conventional mortgage lender. Standard process. Standard terms. What the realtor didn't know, what I hadn't mentioned because she hadn't asked, was that the letter represented less than half of what I could actually spend. I'd gotten the pre-approval 3 months earlier. Before I'd closed on another property. Before I'd sold 2 rental units I'd been holding for years. Before a business deal had finalized that put another $200,000 in liquid assets in my account. The $450 wasn't my limit. It was my safety net. My fallback. The amount I could borrow if everything else fell through. But everything else hadn't fallen through. I had cash. Significant cash. Enough to buy the house outright if I wanted to. But showing that letter, that smaller number, had been intentional. I'd learned early in real estate that showing all your cards up front just drives up prices and attracts competition. You play conservative. You show what's expected. You let people underestimate you. Then you move. The realtor had underestimated me. And now I had information. I knew exactly how she saw people like me. People who drove 10-year-old cars. People who didn't dress like they belonged in Meadowbrook Estates. People who needed to be steered toward more suitable neighborhoods. That information was useful. Because it meant she'd make mistakes. And those mistakes would give me room to maneuver. Let me tell you who I am. My name is Jordan Chen. I'm 34 years old. I work in software development and commercial real estate investing. I started with nothing. Scholarships put me through college. I worked 2 jobs to cover rent and food. Graduated with a degree in computer science and $12,000 in debt. I paid that off in 18 months. Then I started saving. Not spending. Not upgrading my lifestyle. Just saving. Every bonus. Every raise. Every side project that brought in extra income. I put it into index funds and real estate. Small properties at first. A duplex I bought at auction and renovated myself. A condo I rented to grad students. Another duplex in a neighborhood people said was too risky. I didn't care about risk the way other people did. I cared about numbers. Cash flow. Appreciation potential. Exit strategies. And I was good at it. By 28, I owned 4 rental properties free and clear. By 30, I'd sold 2 and reinvested in commercial space. By 32, I had a portfolio worth over $1 million. But I didn't look like it. I still drove the same car I'd bought in college. Still wore jeans and t-shirts. Still lived in a modest apartment because I didn't see the point in paying for space I didn't need. People saw the car, the clothes, the apartment, and they made assumptions. That I was struggling. That I was just starting out. That I couldn't afford the life they were living. They didn't see the spreadsheets. The investments. The bank accounts that had more in them than most people made in 5 years. And I'd learned not to correct them. Because underestimation was an advantage. It made people careless. Made them show their hand. Made them treat me like I didn't matter. And when people think you don't matter, they stop paying attention. That's when you win. The house at 2847 Oakmont Drive had been on the market for 4 months. That was longer than average for Meadowbrook Estates. I'd been tracking it since the listing went live. Downloaded every photo. Read every description. Checked the property records. The seller was a couple in their 60s. They'd bought the house 18 years ago for $310,000. Put in upgrades. Renovations. Added a pool. They were listing it for $725,000. High for the neighborhood. But not unreasonable given the updates. The problem was location. The house backed up to a drainage easement. Not a deal breaker for most buyers, but enough to make people hesitate. Especially at that price. It had been shown 23 times in 4 months. I knew because showing activity was public record if you knew where to look. 23 showings. No offers. That told me something. The house was priced just slightly too high for what buyers were willing to pay. And the sellers were holding firm, waiting for someone to meet their number. But 4 months was a long time. Long enough that they were probably getting nervous. Long enough that a strong offer, even below asking, might get serious consideration. I pulled comps for the neighborhood. Similar houses had sold for between $650 and $700 over the past year. That put the Oakmont house at the top of the range. Maybe $15,000 to $20,000 overpriced. But the drainage easement was a negative. And 4 months on market was a negative. Which meant I had leverage. I didn't need the realtor to show me the house. I could see everything I needed online. Floor plan. Square footage. Tax records. Permit history. I knew exactly what I was buying. What I needed now was access to make an offer. And if the realtor who dismissed me wouldn't help, I'd find someone who would. I called a different agency. Explained I was interested in 2847 Oakmont Drive. The agent, Pete, was professional. Asked standard questions. What was my timeline? Was I pre-approved? Did I need to sell another property first? I answered honestly. My timeline was flexible. I was pre-approved. No other property to sell. He didn't ask about my finances beyond that. Didn't question whether I could afford the neighborhood. Just scheduled a showing for the next day. We met at the house. Pete was punctual. Friendly. He walked me through every room. Pointed out features. Answered my questions about HOA fees, property taxes, Recent sales in the area. I asked about the drainage easement. He was honest. Said it was a concern for some buyers. That it limited future development options for the backyard. That it was probably why the house hadn't sold yet despite being in good condition. I asked if he thought the sellers were motivated. He said off the record, yes. That 4 months was a long time in this market. That they'd had a few lowball offers they'd rejected, but no serious buyers at asking price. I asked what he thought a competitive offer would look like. He said probably $690. Maybe $700 if I wanted to be safe. I thanked him. Told him I'd think about it. He handed me his card. Said to call if I had questions. I went home and ran the numbers again. The house was worth, realistically, $675,000. Maybe $685 if you were generous. But I didn't want to offer what it was worth. I wanted to offer what would get accepted without starting a bidding war. And I wanted to do it in a way that made a point. I called Pete the next morning. Told him I wanted to make an offer. He asked what I was thinking. I said $650,000. Cash. 7-day close. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said that was $75,000 below asking. That the sellers might not take it seriously. I said I understood. But I was offering certainty. No financing contingency. No inspection issues. No delays. Just cash and a fast close. He said he'd present it. 2 days later, he called back. The sellers had countered. $700,000. Firm. I asked if there was room to negotiate. He said probably not. That they'd been insulted by my initial offer. That they felt it didn't reflect the value of the property. I told Pete I'd get back to him. Then I did something the sellers weren't expecting. I withdrew the offer. Completely. Told Pete I appreciated his time but I decided to look at other properties. He was surprised. Asked if I wanted to counter their counter. I said no. I was moving on. The truth was, I wasn't moving on. I was repositioning. Because now the sellers knew 2 things. 1, there was a serious cash buyer interested in their property. 2, that buyer had walked away. And walking away, when you're sitting on a house that hasn't sold in 4 months, creates pressure. I gave it 2 weeks. Then I made my move. While I waited, I bought a different house. Not in Meadowbrook Estates. 3 streets over. A neighborhood called Ridgeline Park. The houses there were smaller. Older. Less prestigious. But they were appreciating fast because Meadowbrook was pricing out buyers who still wanted the school district. I found a property listed at $415,000. 3-bed, 2-bath. Needed cosmetic updates but structurally sound. I offered $400 cash. They accepted. I closed in 9 days. Then I did something unconventional. I didn't move in. I didn't rent it. I renovated it. Full kitchen remodel. New flooring. Fresh paint. Landscaping. Modern fixtures. I put $60,000 into updates. Turned a dated house into something that looked like it belonged in Meadowbrook for half the price. The work took 6 weeks. When it was done, I listed it. Not for rent. For sale. I priced it at $575,000. High for Ridgeline Park. But justified by the renovations. And competitive compared to Meadowbrook. It sold in 11 days. For $560,000. After closing costs and renovation expenses, I cleared $70,000 in profit. But the profit wasn't the point. The point was visibility. Because real estate agents talk. And when a house in Ridgeline Park sells for $50,000 over the neighborhood average, people notice. including agents in Meadowbrook Estates who are trying to move inventory that's been sitting for months. By the time my Ridgeline flip closed, the Oakmont house had been on the market for 6 months. The listing had been updated twice. First with a price drop. $715,000. Then another drop. $695,000. They'd come down $30,000 and still had no offers. I waited another week. Let the second price drop settle in the market. Let the sellers sit with the reality that they'd reduced twice and still had no traction. Then I had Pete reach out. Not with an offer. Just a question. He called the listing agent and asked if the sellers would consider a backup offer in case their current negotiations fell through. There were no current negotiations. The listing agent knew it. Pete knew it. But the phrasing created an implication. That I had options. That I wasn't desperate. That I was only circling back as a courtesy. The listing agent said the sellers would consider any serious offer. Pete said he'd get back to her. I waited 3 more days. Then I made my second offer. $670,000. Cash. 14-day close. And I attached proof of funds. Not a pre-approval letter. Actual bank statements showing I had the cash in hand. No financing. No contingencies. Just money and a timeline. The sellers accepted within 12 hours. We closed 2 weeks later. I wired $670,000. Signed the papers. Took possession of 2847 Oakmont Drive. The house the first realtor had said was out of my range. The house she wouldn't even show me because I didn't look like I belonged in this price range. I'd bought it for $55,000 less than the final asking price. And $75,000 less than what the sellers had countered my first offer with. If they'd accepted $650,000 when I'd first offered it, they would have saved themselves 2 months of carrying costs, another price drop, and the psychological wear of watching their house sit unsold while the market moved on. But they hadn't. Because they'd made the same mistake the realtor had made. They'd assumed I wasn't serious. That my offer was lowball because I couldn't afford better. That I'd come back with more money if they just held firm. They were wrong. And that assumption cost them $20,000. I moved into the Oakmont house. Furnished it. Made it home. And I lived there for exactly 8 months. During that time, I did minor updates. Nothing structural. Just improvements that increased value without requiring permits. I refinished the hardwood floors. Replaced the garage door. Updated light fixtures. Added smart home systems. Repainted the exterior. Resurfaced the pool deck. All cosmetic. All high impact for resale value. The total investment was $32,000. Then, 8 months after I'd bought it, I listed the house. For $795,000. $70,000 more than the original sellers had wanted. $125,000 more than I'd paid. The market had appreciated slightly in those 8 months. My updates added value. But mostly, the house just wasn't sitting on market for 6 months anymore. It wasn't tied to sellers who seemed desperate. It was a well-maintained property in a desirable neighborhood with clear upside. It sold in 3 weeks. For $780,000. After agent fees, closing costs, and the money I'd put into updates, I cleared $93,000 in profit. But the profit still wasn't the main point. Because before I listed the Oakmont house, I bought another property. 2 streets over from Oakmont. In Meadowbrook Estates. A house that had been listed for $850,000. I offered $760,000, cash. They countered at $800,000. I accepted. Closed in 10 days. I'd bought a second house in the neighborhood the realtor said I couldn't afford. Bought it while I still owned the first one. And the second house was bigger. Nicer. Better located. I bought it with cash from selling the Ridgeline flip, cash from my existing portfolio, and cash I'd been holding in reserve. I didn't need a mortgage. Didn't need approval. Didn't need anyone to decide if I belonged in the neighborhood. I just bought it. Real estate transactions are public record. Sales. Prices. Buyer and seller names. All searchable if you know where to look. Which means agents watch them obsessively. I knew the first realtor would see my name. Would see that I'd bought the Oakmont house. And I knew she'd see when I listed it. And when it sold. And when I bought the second property. She reached out 6 weeks after my second purchase. Sent an email through the agency website. Subject line, "Congratulations on your recent transactions." The message was professional. Polite. Said she'd noticed my activity in Meadowbrook Estates. That she'd love to work with me on future purchases. That she specialized in the area and had off-market listings that might interest me. I didn't respond immediately. I let it sit for 3 days. Then I replied. Short. Direct. Thanked her for reaching out. Said I was working with another agent who'd been very helpful. That I appreciated her time. She wrote back within an hour. Said she remembered meeting me months ago. That she hoped there were no hard feelings about how that had gone. That she'd been having a difficult day and might not have given me the attention I deserved. I read it twice. And I understood what she was really saying. She remembered dismissing me. She'd realized, seeing my transactions, that she'd made a mistake. And now she was trying to walk it back. Not because she felt bad. But because she'd lost commission on 2 sales. Potentially $100,000 in fees. Because she'd looked at my car and decided I wasn't worth her time. I didn't reply to the second email. There was nothing to say. The transactions spoke for themselves. I still live in the second Meadowbrook house. The one I bought at $800,000. It's more space than I need. Bigger yard. Better finishes. But I'm not planning to flip it. This one, I'm keeping. Not because I need the status. But because I earned it. And because every time I pull into the driveway, I'm reminded of something important. That underestimation is only permanent if you accept it. The realtor thought she knew who I was based on appearances. The sellers of the Oakmont house thought they knew what my offer meant based on assumptions. They were both wrong. Because what I looked like, what I drove, what I wore, had nothing to do with what I could afford. It had to do with choices. I chose not to spend money on things that didn't matter. I chose to invest instead of consume. I chose to build wealth quietly while other people built appearances. And those choices meant that when the moment came, when I wanted something, I didn't need permission. Didn't need approval. Didn't need anyone to believe I could do it. I just did it. Twice. People treat you based on what they think they know. And most of what they think they know comes from shortcuts. Visual shortcuts. The car you drive signals your income bracket. The clothes you wear signal your priorities. The neighborhood you currently live in signals your status. None of it is accurate. But it's efficient. And efficiency matters more than accuracy when you're making dozens of snap judgments every day. The realtor wasn't evil. She was efficient. She looked at me and made a calculation. This person doesn't match the profile of Meadowbrook buyers. Showing them houses here is a waste of time. Better to redirect them to properties where they're more likely to close. It made sense from her perspective. The problem was her shortcuts were based on incomplete information. She didn't know what I had in the bank. Didn't know my investment history. Didn't know I'd been planning this purchase for months. She just knew I didn't look like her usual clients. So she treated me accordingly. And in doing so, she lost the sale. That's the cost of underestimation. You miss opportunities because your shortcuts filtered them out. The person you dismissed might have been your biggest commission of the year. The offer you rejected might have been the best you were going to get. The buyer you redirected might have bought 2 houses in the neighborhood you said they couldn't afford. Underestimation feels safe. Feels like pattern recognition. But it's just expensive guessing. There's a temptation, when someone underestimates you, to correct them immediately. To prove them wrong in the moment. To say, actually, I can afford this, here's my bank statement, here's my portfolio, here's proof you're wrong about me. I used to do that. Early in my career, when I was younger and people questioned my decisions, I'd defend myself. Show my credentials. Explain my reasoning. Prove I wasn't the inexperienced kid they thought I was. And you know what happened? Nothing. They'd nod politely. Say that's great. And then continue treating me the same way. Because people don't change their minds based on information. They change their minds based on outcomes. So I stopped correcting people. Stopped defending. Stopped explaining. I just moved. Quietly. Strategically. And I let the results do the talking. The realtor thought I couldn't afford Meadowbrook. I bought 2 houses there. The sellers thought my offer was lowball. I walked away, and they ended up taking less from me than what they'd rejected. People thought I was living small because I had to. I was living small by choice while building a 7-figure net worth. I didn't need to correct them. The outcomes corrected them for me. And outcomes are permanent. They don't require explanation. They just exist. Undeniable. Unchangeable. Proof that's stronger than any argument I could have made. The ridgeline flip wasn't about profit. I mean, yes, I made 70,000. That mattered. But the real value was leverage. Because when you're negotiating to buy a house, sellers and agents assess your seriousness based on what else you've done. Are you a first-time buyer who might get cold feet? Are you an investor who actually closes deals? Do you have a track record, or are you just looking? The ridgeline flip gave me a track record. It showed I could execute. Find a property. Renovate it. Sell it for profit. Do it all in under 3 months. When I came back to make my second offer on the Oakmont house, I wasn't just a random buyer anymore. I was someone with a recent successful transaction. Someone who'd closed fast. Someone who did what they said they'd do. That's leverage. It changes how people perceive your offers. A $670,000 cash offer from a first-time buyer sounds risky. The same offer from someone who just flipped a property for profit sounds like a sure thing. The sellers of the Oakmont house didn't know I'd flipped ridgeline specifically to create that perception. They just knew I was a serious buyer with proof of execution. And that made my offer credible. Which made them accept it. Leverage isn't just about money. It's about perception of competence. And competence is built through action, not explanation. I didn't need the second Meadowbrook house. I was perfectly comfortable in the Oakmont property. Could have lived there for years. Built equity. Sold it eventually for more profit. But I bought the second house for a reason. Because buying once could have been luck. Could have been a one-time thing. Could have been an anomaly that people dismissed. Buying twice was a pattern. It said this person belongs here. This person isn't visiting the neighborhood. They're investing in it. They're committed. They're part of the fabric. I wanted that perception. Not for status. But because I'd learned something about real estate. The first property in a good neighborhood is hard. You're fighting to get in. Proving you belong. Justifying your presence. The second property is easier. Because now you're a resident. Someone with stake in the community. Someone agents want to work with because you might buy again. Someone sellers trust because you already closed once. The second house wasn't just a home. It was confirmation. Confirmation that the first purchase wasn't a fluke. That I wasn't a one-time buyer who stretched to afford a single property. I was a repeat investor who could operate in this market comfortably. That distinction mattered. Because it meant future opportunities would come to me instead of me chasing them. And opportunities that come to you are always easier to convert than opportunities you have to fight for. This wasn't the first time I'd been underestimated. It was just the most expensive example. I'd seen the pattern in college when I told my advisor I wanted to study computer science and real estate. She'd said those fields don't really overlap. That I should pick one and focus. I'd ignored her. Double majored. Used coding skills to build property analysis software I still use today. I'd seen it when I bought my first duplex at 23. The seller's agent had laughed. Said I didn't have enough experience to manage a rental property. That I'd lose money. I'd bought it anyway. Rented both units within a month. Turned profit from day one. I'd seen it when I told colleagues I was investing in a neighborhood they called declining. They'd said I was throwing money away. 3 years later, property values in that area had doubled. They stopped calling it declining and started calling it up and coming. Every single time, the pattern was the same. Someone looked at me and decided I didn't know what I was doing. That I was naive. Inexperienced. Making a mistake. And every single time, the results proved otherwise. Not because I'm smarter than other people. But because I do my research. I run my numbers. I plan carefully. And I don't let other people's shortcuts determine my ceiling. The Meadowbrook purchases were just the latest iteration. Someone decided I couldn't afford something. I proved them wrong. Then did it again to prove the first time wasn't luck. That's the pattern. And I'll keep following it until people stop making assumptions based on incomplete information. I heard through other agents that the first realtor left the area. Not immediately. About a year after my second Meadowbrook purchase. She'd moved to a different market. Different city. I don't know if my transactions had anything to do with it. Probably not directly. But I'd imagine it didn't help. Because when you're a realtor, your reputation is everything. And when word spreads that you dismissed a buyer who ended up closing 2 high-value cash deals in your primary market with a competing agent, that's not a great look. Other agents talk. Clients hear stories. And suddenly you're known as the person who let a major opportunity walk away because you made assumptions. I don't think she was a bad person. I think she was busy. Working with clients who fit her usual profile. And I didn't fit. So she made a call. The efficient call. The one that saved her time in the moment. But efficiency without accuracy is just speed in the wrong direction. And in real estate, wrong direction is expensive. I hope she learned from it. I hope in her new market she shows every house to every buyer who asks. I hope she doesn't make the same shortcut twice. But I don't know. And honestly, I don't think about it much. Because my focus isn't on what happened to her. It's on what I built despite her. And what I built stands on its own. 2 houses. 2 successful closings. 1 very clear message. Don't decide who people are based on what they look like. Decide based on what they do. And if you can't wait to see what they do, then get out of their way and let someone else help them do it. The second Meadowbrook house is worth about $950,000 now. I bought it for $800,000 3 years ago. I've put maybe $40,000 into updates. Landscaping. Kitchen appliances. New HVAC system. Nothing major. Just maintenance that added value. My equity in the house is over $190,000. If I wanted to sell tomorrow, I'd walk away with that profit, minus closing costs. But I'm not selling. Because the equity isn't the point anymore. The point is that I own it outright. No mortgage. No debt. No monthly payment beyond property taxes and insurance. Which means my cost of living is lower than most people making half what I make. And that flexibility gives me options. I can take risks in my career I couldn't take if I had a mortgage payment. I can invest aggressively in other opportunities because my housing is secure. I can weather market downturns without worrying about making payments. That's the real value of buying right. Not the profit you might make when you sell, but the freedom you gain while you own. And I gained that freedom by being patient. By letting people underestimate me while I positioned myself. By not needing to prove anything until the moment I was ready to move. That patience paid off. Not just in dollars. In leverage. In options. In the ability to make decisions based on what I want instead of what I can afford. If you're at the beginning of this journey, if you're looking at houses you think you can't afford, if someone has told you to be more realistic about your budget, here's what I want you to know. They might be right about what you can afford today. But today isn't permanent. What you can afford today is based on decisions you made yesterday. What you'll be able to afford tomorrow is based on decisions you make today. I couldn't afford Meadowbrook when I graduated college. I could barely afford rent. But I made decisions. I saved aggressively. I invested consistently. I bought properties below market and added value. I didn't upgrade my lifestyle when my income increased. I upgraded my net worth. And eventually, those decisions compounded. They built on each other. They created options that didn't exist before. So if someone tells you that you can't afford something, don't argue with them. Don't defend yourself. Don't try to prove them wrong in the moment. Just ask yourself one question. What would I need to do to afford this in 2 years? Then do those things. Quietly. Consistently. Without announcement. And when you're ready, when the numbers work, when you've built the foundation, make your move. Not to prove anyone wrong. But because you've earned the right to make that move. And when you do, make it count. It took about 6 months before neighbors in Meadowbrook realized I'd bought 2 houses in the neighborhood. Not because I told them. But because one of them was a real estate agent who'd looked up recent sales. She'd mentioned it at a neighborhood event. Said she'd noticed interesting activity on Oakmont Drive. That the house had sold twice in 8 months. First to me. Then to someone else. And that I'd bought another property during that same period. People were curious. Asked questions. How did the flip work? Why didn't I just keep the first house? Was I planning to buy more properties in the area? I answered honestly. Said I'd bought the Oakmont house intending to live in it. That I'd found a better fit and decided to sell. That I'd reinvested the profit into the second house. I didn't mention the realtor who'd dismissed me. Didn't mention the assumptions. Didn't frame it as revenge or proving anyone wrong. Just talked about it as normal real estate investment strategy. Because that's what it was. The narrative people created was their own. Some thought I was a savvy investor. Others thought I was a flipper driving up neighborhood prices. A few seemed impressed. A few seemed resentful. I didn't try to control the perception. Didn't try to make them see it my way. I just lived my life. Maintained my property. Was a good neighbor. And eventually, the novelty wore off. I became just another resident. Someone who lived there. Belonged there. Had earned their place through the same process everyone else had. By buying a house and making it home. I think about that first interaction with the realtor sometimes. Not often. But sometimes. I think about the moment she looked at my car and decided I wasn't worth her time. The moment she asked to see my pre-approval letter and concluded I didn't belong in Meadowbrook Estates. And I wonder what would have happened if I'd argued with her. If I'd shown her my full financial picture. If I demanded she show me the house anyway. Would it have changed anything? Probably not. Because the problem wasn't information. It was perception. And perception doesn't change because you provide facts. It changes because you create new outcomes. So I didn't argue. I didn't defend. I just moved. Bought the house she wouldn't show me. Bought it for less than the sellers wanted. Sold it for profit. Then bought another house in the same neighborhood. Bigger. Better. More expensive. I bought it twice. Not the same house literally. But the dream. The goal. The thing people said I couldn't afford. I bought it once to prove I could. And I bought it again to prove the first time wasn't luck. That's the lesson I carry now. When someone tells you that you can't afford something, don't waste energy convincing them otherwise. Just build the foundation that makes it possible. Then execute. Quietly. Efficiently. Undeniably. And when it's done, when you've accomplished the thing they said you couldn't, don't gloat. Don't explain. Don't demand acknowledgement. Just live in the result. Because results don't need explanation. They speak for themselves. And outcomes, once created, can't be argued with. They said I couldn't afford the house. I bought it twice. And now I live in one of them. Not because I proved anyone wrong. But because I proved myself right.